Well, we're nearing the tail end of today's show, and for today's Live on Live, we discuss one of the more important days in world history, the Normandy Landings in 1944, and in particular, the bravery of a group of men whose contribution on D-Day has never been recognised. Our special guest is author Linda Hervieux, whose recent book, Forgotten, the Untold Story of D-Day's Black Heroes at Home and at War, looks at the mission of a barrage balloon unit of African American soldiers. You're very welcome to the program, Linda.
Thank you, Amanda.
Now, before we talk about this particular group of men, can you first give us a brief description of racial segregation in the US Army during World War II? For example, what was it like for a black person who gave themselves to national service?
The United States Army during World War II was entirely segregated. It was essentially two armies. It was black and white. It was a reflection of the American Southern style of segregation, nicknamed Jim Crow. And except it was worse because it was total. So a black soldier who was stationed even in the north of America would be subjected to the same sort of segregation that existed in the South. It was a completely separate existence from training to deployment.
So certainly not as easy as their white counterparts. But before we let's look now at barrage balloons. They're literally bags of gas attached to a steel cable which are anchored to the ground. They were used during World War II to deny low-level airspace to enemy aircraft. Is that right?
Yeah, they were essentially hydrogen-filled balloons. They were ranged in size. The ones that went to war were a bit smaller, about 125 pounds. The ones that flew over defense plants on the American West Coast and in Britain were much larger. They could be the size of about 2 yellow school buses that we see in the States. They were huge. They could be up to 900 pounds, and they protected these sites, or at war, these men and the materiel that was landing on the beaches of Normandy, certainly from enemy planes dive bombing.
Now, the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion, which consisted of all black soldiers, landed on the Omaha and the Utah beaches of Normandy on June 6. Can you tell us about their mission that day?
Yeah, the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion was the only African-American combat unit to land during the invasions. They were trained as infantry soldiers. They landed with the infantry, and their job was to get those balloons up as soon as the small arms fire was cleared on the beaches. It was a dangerous job. These men, they took about 150 landing craft. They were divided up among the infantry, and all of the balloons that flew over the invasion beaches, Omaha and Utah, the American beaches, were flown by black soldiers.
So presumably their mission was very crucial to the D-Day landings.
Yes, at the time, it was not known that the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, was as decimated as it was. So the idea that there could be a huge response to the landings from the German Air Force was really a worry of the Allied command. And along with the Royal Air Force balloon squadrons that landed on the British beaches, the American balloons battalion was about 621 men, and they landed in the early hours of the landings of D-Day.
Now, obviously very chaotic on that morning, and one can only imagine a very difficult mission. One member of the 320th was actually nominated for the Medal of Honor, but he never received it. Why was this?
So in World War II, and the same as in the First World War, no African Americans were given the Medal of Honor, and this would not be corrected until President Bill Clinton gave 7 of them out in 1997. And so on the morning of June 6, 1944, Waverly Woodson, who was a medic from West Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, landed with the 320th on Omaha Beach, and he would work for 30 hours before he collapsed, saving lives. He was wounded on the approach to the beach, though, quite severely, and the fact that he worked through his pain after his landing craft was hit twice was quite extraordinary. And it would come out later that he would have been nominated for the Medal of Honor, the highest award for bravery in the U.S., and he would not get it.
So the fact that he didn't get it is quite astonishing, and the fact that this battalion hasn't really been recognised in history is also quite unfathomable. Why hasn't this story, do you think, been told before?
That's a very good question. I think that what we see throughout the service of Black soldiers to America is that so often their contributions had been lost. There are a lot of units that we know about today, such as the famous pilots, the Tuskegee Airmen, but for decades they were forgotten as well. And it wasn't until a pretty obscure TV film brought them back in the 90s that we know about these hero pilots. Why this particular unit of men, like I said, the only combat unit to land on D-Day, is not shown in movies on D-Day, is not shown in most of the books, is a great mystery. But I think that we can just look at the history of how other African American units were also sort of erased from the stories of not just World War II, but other wars as well. And we have to look that way. Why? That's the great mystery to me, because it seems pretty clear that their service was quite extraordinary, at least to me. I had never heard of barrage balloons, and I think that it's very interesting what they did.
So what was it particularly that alerted you to the fact that there was an unwritten chapter in World War II history?
Well, for me, I was looking for an interesting story to write for the 65th anniversary of D-Day in June of 2009. And one of the men from this unit, a veteran from Virginia named William Dabney, was honored by the French government. He was given the Legion of Honor, the highest award in France, for his service. And I'm a freelance journalist. A lot of us reporters wrote about him that day. And I just wanted to know a little bit more about what these men did. It seemed a shame to only do one newspaper story on them. And so I started looking for other men who were still alive, and eventually found a dozen and the families of many others.
And you actually spoke to some of the surviving members of the 320th, and that's the basis of the research for your book.
Right. So I went looking for members of this unit with a researcher who helped me. We eventually found names of men that we could track down, and then I started looking for records. So it was quite a hunt, because nothing was obvious and nothing was easy to find. And also Bill Dabney, the vet who was honored in France, was not in contact with other members too. So that was difficult.
Well, then we've run out of time, unfortunately. Our thanks are to special guest Linda Hervieux, whose book is Forgotten, the Untold Story of D-Day's Black Heroes, at home and at war. You're listening to RFI.